When I think of my nostalgia for Trails of Cold Steel 2, I remember so much excitement as I got to continue where its predecessor left off. The most vivid moments are the impactful story notes and a very enjoyable ending, but also the characters and the world getting expanded upon. I feel as though it introduced some of my favorite moments in the franchise and took things in a different direction, which I appreciated. And after rewatching my playthrough, I've decided to place it behind Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. Here's why. Much like with the previous entry in this series, I had taken a walkthrough approach with the game since it was my second playthrough on the hardest difficulty with levels carried over. In one of the more unique aspects of the playthrough, I also got to witness the Glacia Shrine for the first time, as well as the events involving the Black Records, which I was a big fan of. Overall, I felt much like I did in the first game. I enjoyed the story and how it progressed. I loved the twists involving Osborn and Rufus, while also remembering the surprise of Crow dying. The excitement and fun was present throughout the entire playthrough, and the largest detriment, which was the divertisement with Lloyd, I skipped entirely thanks to some New Game Plus options. The rewatch experience was not as enjoyable to my surprise. I struggled a lot with the story, to the point where I questioned what actually occurred in the game other than character development and setup. I couldn't quite figure out if there was an overarching narrative occurring because the events I got to engage with didn't actually push the story forward. It was like the story was present and happening all around me, but what I got to participate in didn't contribute. The game starts with Ring being separated from his fellow classmates and wanting to reunite with them. This process takes about 15 hours in my playthrough, concluding with the Noble Alliance's all-out assault on Ymir. Following those events, we're given the Courageous and go out into the world to rescue former Thor students with the ultimate goal of liberating Trista. After collecting all of the Thor students, we go on an excursion to build Valimar a custom weapon and then use it to liberate Trista. Following this, we infiltrate the Imperial Villa and then take it upon ourselves to infiltrate the Infernal Castle. This collection of events don't really serve much of a purpose, and I genuinely struggle to see the narrative of this game. I can see the idea of Reen looking to reunite with his classmates with the ultimate goal of liberating Trista, but the game very much treats it as an afterthought. In fact, the liberating of Trista is extremely underwhelming, as you only have one Divine Knight battle, and then you fight Class 1, which they admit is basically for no reason. It's tough to believe that we spent the entire game for this payoff, of which isn't even the end of the game. Adding on to that, Class 7's fantasy that they are a third faction in the war is pushed so heavily and is just completely wrong. Literally every significant action that is taken is to the benefit of the Imperial Army and to the detriment of the Noble Alliance. In fact, many of the missions we do are either in conjunction with the Imperial Army and/or at their request. At the end of each mission, the Imperial Army gains a large strategic location liberated, and Class 7 pretends that's neutral. This was definitely one of the more frustrating aspects of the game for me. It's understandable that Class 7 wants to rescue their friends and family, but there are neutral ways to go about it that don't involve huge swings in the war. There are also times when you just have to accept that nothing can be done if their neutrality is to be maintained. And latching onto this for a moment, I feel that would have been the great story piece to wrap Trails of Cold Steel around. Class 7 wants to make a difference in the war their way, but they struggle to find ways to do so. Eventually, they come to realize that in order to make a difference that they want, they have to choose a side, and they deem the Imperial Army as the more justified cause. This sets up Ring perfectly for the divertisement and justifies our actions that are already present in the game. It does make me wonder what the story of the game is supposed to be, though. Liberate Thor's, its students, and then stop the war that we don't want to be involved in? Gather strength so that we can fight Crow and bring him back to school when he's a prisoner of war? Stop the war in our own way by desperately trying to look for loopholes to get involved when that only affects one side? I will also say this is to mention hardly anything about the other frustrating aspects of the story, such as this crazy fantasy that Class 7 can just bring Crow back home as if nothing ever happened. Or how, in many sequences where Class 7 wins a fight, they actually lose the fight and someone has to bail them out. In what universe can Class 7 bring change to the world if they can't even defeat their enemies? In what universe can Class 7 beat the next challenge if they couldn't beat the previous? It actually baffles me in this rewatch experience to hear myself speak on how much I enjoyed the story and its events when so little actually happens. Even the large reveals and twists effectively happen at the end of the game, but aren't given enough impact. Osborn being alive is huge, and to be fair, he makes big moves. But there's also another Divine Knight that is just never touched on again. Crow dies, and after spending so much time and energy around this character, we don't even get a funeral to properly send him off? Nothing to put a close on his arc where everyone can get their last word in. They're just latched on to the end of the game and then it's basically over. I also have to mention the divertisement with Lloyd, which is probably the lowest point in the game for me. I can definitely understand the coolness factor of playing these characters for the first time in 3D, but the way they approach it feels all wrong. You don't get access to your quartz, items, accessories, or anything really. You're stuck with pre-built characters in a long dungeon and they're just not good or fun to play as. The story of it also feels like a throwaway and not important. It should have been a collection of scenes to begin with, honestly. I will say that the general gameplay of Trails of Cold Steel 2 is drastically improved though. There's a lot of freedom to do whatever you want and the burden of quests from the previous game is lessened a great deal. Combat feels good and the addition of overdrive is a fun tactical element, although Divine Knight battles, despite the great addition of the support member, are too prevalent and just not that much fun for me. Based on memory, I ranked Trails of Cold Steel 2 at 31 out of 117 and I just can't see it being that high. I gave it plenty of leeway with the first game for being a new entry, and now that I'm 2 games in, I can't do that anymore. I still like the characters, I still like the world, and I still like the twists. However, the structure of the game and how it chooses to tell its story severely falters. Even with the gameplay and combat being improved and being even more enjoyable, 82% of my playthrough was spent outside of combat encounter. I will say that this was one of the harder decisions I've had to make. Present-day me didn't vibe with this game as much as I thought I would, and past me enjoyed the moments that mattered. I also can't escape the fact that I'm well aware of the other games, and that any likes and dislikes I have with them color this differently. I know the setups, the payoffs, the successes, and the failures. That said, when it comes to this series in particular, the story matters most, and I just don't think it holds up. So, after saying all of that, I think Trails of Cold Steel 2 ends up after Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch. These were both games that I played through twice and was definitely a tough decision. Ultimately, sequel pain plays a large role in this, as I would have hoped that a sequel to a game would be equal to or better than the previous entry. In this instance, Trails of Cold Steel 2 takes a surprising step back due to the rewatch.